All right, hello friends, and welcome to any new viewers, and welcome back to anyone that is returning. So for today's video, I want to talk about my May wrap-up. So I'm gonna talk about the books that I read for May, and then I'm gonna talk about my June TBR list, or the books that I plan to read in June. Now, most professionals would make this into two separate videos, but my reading for the month of May could be summarized in one word, and that would be pitiful. I only read 3 books, so it wasn't worth it to do a separate video on just those 3 books. It ended up being a much busier month for me because I decided to start this whole booktube thing. So I had less time to actually read, which is ironic, isn't it? All right, onwards. So the books that I read in May. First book was A Criminal Justice, and this is by William L. Myers Jr. This is actually the 4th book in a series called the Philadelphia Legal Series. It was released in March, and I got it when I re-signed up for Kindle Unlimited, so I read it through that. Basic plot of this book is this hotshot lawyer gets arrested at the very beginning for this cold-blooded murder that was caught on tape. So it seems like, how could he possibly get out of this? And the rest of the book is trying to get him out of it. Like I said, this is the 4th book in a series, so I've read the other 3 books in the series, which are all, I do believe, part of Kindle Unlimited. I found that this book wasn't as good as the first 2 just because he seems to be following the exact same formula. I originally picked up this series for 2 main reasons. First, suspense thrillers, that is one of my favorite genres to read. And secondly, this book is set in Philadelphia, and I actually did my undergrad at Penn. So I lived in Philly for about 4 years, and I haven't been back since around the time that I graduated. So it was like revisiting the city through the book. I don't know. Is that weird? Either way, I give this book 4 out of 5 stars. I think he's working on more, and I probably will continue to read because that's how I am when I start series. But it was certainly more disappointing than the first book was. All right, second book that I read this month was Lost by James Patterson, and I actually did a book review for this book on my channel. Also falls in the category of, we've got a suspense or some sort of legal drama. And so the main character in this book, he is a Florida detective, and he's trying to bring down this child trafficking ring. So he's trying to get the other police officers in his department to take this issue seriously and help him bring down the ring so he can save the children that were a part of it. I also gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. And then the last book that I read this month was called The Girl with the Loudoun Voice by Abidare. She is a Nigerian author, and this was her debut novel. And I found this book because it's been advertised a lot. So I think that I just saw it on Instagram maybe or something, and the cover, it like really draws you in. Plus the fact that it was her first novel, I wanted to give it a try. So the main character in this book is a 14-year-old Nigerian girl. Her name is Aduni. Her mom dies, and her father sells her into marriage in order to be able to pay his rent and pay for food for him and her brothers. She becomes the 3rd wife of an older man that lives in a village next to where she is, and all she wants to do is keep going to school, get the education that will allow her to become a teacher so that she is then able to help uplift the other girls in her villages and they can avoid the fate of early marriage. Throughout this book, she suffers a lot at the hands of several people, but she's extremely resilient, and she never loses sight of her goal on getting out and getting her education so that she can go back to her village and help the other girls that are there. This message was dear to me because I am a teacher, so I believe in the power of education, and it makes me happy to see this author was driving that point home, and more true to the fact that education really can be used to uplift these poor girls in these impossible situations. If you want to give this book a try, I would recommend getting the audiobook if you are unfamiliar with what Nigerian accents should sound like. I am West African, so I don't have that problem. I did listen to the audiobook anyway just because I like audiobooks, and I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I have a bit more detailed review of it on Goodreads and on my Instagram. Okay, so now on to books that I plan to read in June. I'm hoping to have a much more successful month in June. There's also going to be quite a bit of nonfiction on here because I aim to have about 20% nonfiction, and I'm just a little bit below the mark there. So I'm going to use this month to catch up on that. The first book is Rage by Carol Anderson. So this is part of the Blackout buddy read, and I've actually read a few books by Carol Anderson already, and this was on my list to read at some point, so that's just been moved up front so that I can participate in that buddy read that's going down on June 19th. I actually do have some more reading recommendations for those of you that want to take it further than just 2 books in 2 weeks, and I'm going to be filming that video pretty soon after this one. All right, second on my list is Embracing Failure by Mat Pelletier, and I actually need to read this book ASAP. It doesn't seem very long, so that's good, but I'm using the message in this book to help me write my commencement speech for my seniors that are graduating in like 5 days. So I'm gonna get on that book as soon as possible. Third book I have on my list is Black Tide: The Devastating Impact of the Gulf Oil Spill by Antonia. Juhasz is, I believe, how you pronounce her name. And the reason that this book made my list is because I was helping one of my students out with a project that they were doing for an AP and Visci class. And we were working on a presentation on oil spills in the Niger Delta, which is located in Nigeria. And I realized while we were doing research for that, I didn't actually know much about the devastation that people in the regions where companies are just spilling oil over and over again without cleaning them up, the health effects that result from that. And so I was looking for a book that would detail that a little bit more. And while there aren't any books specifically on oil spills in the Niger Delta, this is one that I found that is related. So I thought that I would give it a read. Fourth on my list is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. So this is a classic, and I think most people probably read this in high school or in their high school classes. I didn't read a lot of classics in high school because I didn't have such a great English teacher. He just didn't teach us anything. So, but that's fine because I'm an adult now, so it is now my responsibility to seek out books that I want to read, and this is one of them. I don't actually know anything about the premise of this book other than that it follows a very young Black girl in the South, and she's dealing with some sort of abuse. And I think I've also seen that this book has been banned for reasons that I also don't know and probably will look into when I get to reading it. Fifth book on my list, I don't know if I'm gonna get to this because I'm still on the waiting list from my library, but this is If It Bleeds by Stephen King. So this is his most recent release. It is a collection of 4 short stories, and I've never read any of King's short stories, so if I can get a hold of it, it's definitely going to be read in this month. Sixth on my list is Not a Crime to Be Poor: The Criminalization of Poverty in America. This is by Peter Edelman, and I saw this as a recommended book if you have read the book Evicted, which I have read, so I decided to throw this on my list. It seems to be a discussion of a very important issue. Seventh book that I want to read, and actually I've already read this book, so this is more of a reread, and this is The Radium Girls. So I am reading or rereading this book. I don't usually reread books ever, and I actually have a video on that is waiting to be edited. But I'm working on an enrichment class for summer school for some of my chem students, and I think that this book is such a great case study as I try to bring in how some of the things that we learn about relate to the real world and specifically social justice. So because I read this book, I can tell you what it's about. We're following a group of girls who were working in these watch factories during the war. The factories were using radium paint, which we know today is radioactive, to paint the dials on these watches, and they were letting these girls lick these paintbrushes. And at first, they may not have known the consequences, but eventually they did realize what was happening. These girls were getting cancer. Their jaws were literally disintegrating because of the radiation. Radium, if you don't know, is very similar to calcium. So it penetrates their bones, and that's why they were literally falling apart. Eventually, the companies, even after they learned about the harmful effects, they tried to cover it up because profit. And the the journalist is following the girls' fight in court to be compensated for all of the pain and suffering and eventual death of basically all of them. So those are the books that I have confirmed on my June TBR. I think I'm going to add at least one more, just a more fun one to break up all the seriousness of the books that I currently have on there. I can't think of anything. I probably will find something on Kindle Unlimited because I still have that membership until the end of this month, so might as well use it. If you've made it to the end of this video, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you might be wondering, who is this wannabe booktuber and why is she not sitting in front of a bookcase of books?